Before there were borders, there was the land. Before there were flags, there were fires. Before anyone had a name for any of it, a continent breathed, ancient and vast, holding its secrets in the dark. And then came the people. And then came everything else. This is not simply the story of a country. It is the story of an idea so radical, so stubbornly alive, that it has survived every attempt, from within and without, to extinguish it. A story of blood and thunder, of genius and cruelty, of ordinary human beings doing extraordinary and terrible things in the same breath. This is America. And it begins long before anyone called it that. Tens of thousands of years before a single European sail broke the Atlantic horizon, this land was alive with civilization. Not one civilization, dozens. Hundreds. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy of the Northeast had constructed a democratic government of such sophistication that Benjamin Franklin himself would later study it when imagining how free people might govern themselves. In the Mississippi River Valley, the Cahokia people raised a city larger than London. Across the sun-scorched southwest, the ancestral Puebloans carved entire communities into sheer cliff faces hundreds of feet above canyon floors, buildings that still stand today, silent and breathtaking. These were astronomers and architects, diplomats and artists, farmers and philosophers. They had been here for millennia. This was their world. And then in 1492 the world cracked open. A Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish flag in search of a western route to Asia, made landfall on a Caribbean island and called it paradise. He had no idea what he had found. He had no idea what he had unleashed. Within decades the floodgates opened. Spain, Portugal, France, England, the great European powers descended on this continent like a tide that could not be turned. They came for gold. They came for glory. They came carrying crosses and cannons and, most devastating of all, diseases against which the indigenous population had no immunity. The catastrophe that followed was among the worst in human history. Some scholars estimate that within a century of first contact, up to 90% of the native population of the America perished. Entire languages vanished. Entire civilizations, libraries of human knowledge accumulated across thousands of years, simply ceased to exist. The Great Collision had begun, and the cost was staggering beyond all reckoning. And yet, on the eastern shore of this battered continent, something new was taking root. The English planted their first permanent settlement at Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607, and nearly killed them all. They arrived unprepared, devastatingly ignorant of what they were facing. In the first winter they starved. They buried their dead in secret so the Powhatan Confederacy watching from the tree line would not know how desperate they had become. But they did not leave. Then in 1620 another ship, the Mayflower, arrived further north, carrying religious dissenters so convinced of their divine mission that they would name their settlement Plymouth and believe, with all their hearts, that God himself had led them here. One by one the colonies took hold. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. And with them came something that would, over the next century and a half, become explosive. A new kind of person. These settlers were no longer quite English. They had been changed by the land, by the distance from authority, by the sheer necessity of making decisions for themselves. They were becoming Americans, though they did not yet know what that word would cost them. By the 1760s, 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic seaboard, home to roughly 2.5 million people. Farmers, merchants, ministers, lawyers, enslaved Africans, indentured servants, and dreamers of every variety. Above them all, the increasingly suffocating hand of the British Crown. The taxes, in retrospect, were almost trivially small. The Stamp Act, the Townshend duties, a tax on tea. But it was never about the money. It was about the question that crackled beneath every fireside debate, every pamphlet printed in secret, every tavern argument running long into the night. By what right does any authority govern a people without their consent? It was a question that, once asked loudly enough, could not be unasked. On the morning of April 19, 1775, at a small wooden bridge in Concord, Massachusetts, a musket fired. No one knows which side pulled the trigger first. History does not agree. It does not matter. What matters is that when the smoke cleared, the world had changed. Ralph Waldo Emerson would call it the shot heard round the world, and for once, a poet's hyperbole was simply the truth. The man chosen to lead the Continental Army was a Virginia planter named George Washington, not the greatest military mind of his age, but something arguably more important, a man of unbreakable character and absolute personal integrity. He lost more battles than he won. He watched his men freeze and starve at Valley Forge, their feet wrapped in rags, blood marking their footprints in the snow. He held them together through sheer force of will. And on October 19, 1781, the British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, and a new nation, trembling, improbable, unprecedented in all of human history, was born. The founding documents were extraordinary. The Declaration of Independence announced to the world that all men are created equal, words that burned with revolutionary fire even as the man who wrote them enslaved over 600 human beings. The Constitution that followed was a marvel of political engineering, a careful architecture of checks and balances designed to prevent any single person from seizing too much power. But it contained a compromise so morally indefensible that its authors knew it even as they wrote it. Slavery, the ownership of human beings, was not abolished. It was protected, codified, and woven into the fabric of the new republic like a thread of poison through silk. The founders kicked the question down the road, hoping some future generation would solve it. That future generation would pay in blood. The nation expanded. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the country's size overnight. Explorers Lewis and Clark pushed into landscapes that left them speechless. Settlers poured westward under the banner of manifest destiny, the near-religious conviction that God had ordained American expansion from sea to shining sea. This expansion was built on displacement. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced tens of thousands of Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole people from their ancestral homelands at gunpoint. The Trail of Tears killed thousands. The pattern repeated across decades, across tribes, across every piece of land that settlers decided they wanted. The American story in these years is inseparable from this violence. To tell it any other way would be a lie. And still the wound at the nation's heart deepened. By 1860, there were nearly 4 million enslaved African Americans in the South, their labor generating the cotton wealth that powered not just the Southern economy but much of the industrializing North as well. They were human beings stripped of every legal right, every family bond, every protection under law, and who nonetheless maintained a culture of extraordinary resilience, creativity, and spiritual power. The resistance was constant. They escaped. They fought. They organized. And the political tension between slave states and free states had been building, decade by decade, like pressure in a sealed boiler, until it could no longer be contained. In 1860, a self-educated lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln was elected president. 7 southern states seceded before he took the oath of office. 4 more followed when the first shots were fired. The Civil War had come. 620,000 Americans would die in it, more than in every other American war combined. Brothers fought brothers. Towns were burned. The Union and Confederate armies clashed in battles so ferocious that the names of the places, Antietam, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor, became permanent synonyms for slaughter. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and the moral stakes of the war shifted irrevocably. This was no longer just a war to preserve the Union. It was a war to determine whether human beings could own other human beings on this soil. When General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox on April 9, 1865, something ancient and monstrous had been broken. 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was shot in the back of the head at Ford's Theater and died the following morning. The nation that had survived the war now had to learn, without the man who had led it, how to become something it had never been, truly free. Reconstruction stumbled and ultimately failed. The promises made to freed Black Americans were dismantled one by one as the white South reasserted its power and the exhausted North looked away. But even as those promises were betrayed, the country itself was transforming at a breathtaking pace. The transcontinental railroad stitched the continent together coast to coast. Steel mills blazed through Pittsburgh nights. Edison lit a bulb in Menlo Park. Immigrants, Irish, Italian, Jewish, Polish, Chinese, Greek, flooded through Ellis Island by the millions, each one carrying nothing but a name and a desperate, incandescent hope. Cities exploded. Skyscrapers reached for the sky. The Gilded Age was gaudily, brutally, magnificently American in every way. And it was just the warm-up. The 20th century arrived like a freight train running without brakes. The First World War pulled America onto a world stage it would never leave. The Roaring '20s blazed with jazz and reckless speculation until the morning of October 29, 1929, when the stock market collapsed and the Great Depression began. Then on a quiet Sunday morning in December 1941, Japanese carrier bombers tore apart the sky over Pearl Harbor, and America went to war again. This time the stakes were civilizational. Hitler's armies had swallowed Europe. Imperial Japan had swept across the Pacific. The future of democracy itself was genuinely, terrifyingly uncertain. America mobilized on a scale the world had never seen. Factories that had made cars began making tanks within weeks. Women who had never set foot in a factory were riveting B-17 bombers. A generation of young men, many of them farm boys who had never left their home counties, crossed oceans to fight in places whose names they could not pronounce. On June 6, 1944, they ran into machine gun fire on the beaches of Normandy. They ran into it and they kept running, and they did not stop until Berlin fell. The war ended. And in its wake came a terrible new world. A world divided between two superpowers, each armed with the capacity to end human civilization in an afternoon. The Cold War was unlike any conflict in history, fought not on battlefields but with ideology, espionage, proxy wars, and the perpetual nerve-shredding threat of nuclear annihilation. For nearly 5 decades, the United States and the Soviet Union stared each other down across a chessboard the size of the globe. Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, where for 13 days in October 1962, the world held its breath and the two superpowers came closer to nuclear war than they have ever come before or since. But in the middle of all that existential fear, something even more fundamental was happening at home. The question the founders had left unanswered was demanding its answer at last. On December 1, 1955, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama bus. She was arrested. The black community of Montgomery organized a boycott that lasted 381 days. And a young Baptist minister named Martin Luther King Jr. emerged from that crucible as the most powerful moral voice in America. The civil rights movement that followed was not a polite request. It was a moral revolution, sustained by breathtaking personal courage, answered at every turn by state-sanctioned violence, and ultimately unstoppable. On August 28, 1963, 250,000 people gathered on the National Mall, and King told the world about a dream so simple and so radical that it split the country down the middle. That one day, a person would be judged not by the color of their skin but by the content of their character. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 followed. The law changed. The country changed. Slowly, unevenly, incompletely, but it changed. And America looked up. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. 600 million people watched it happen. For one brief, luminous moment, the entire world held its breath together, and the word that crossed every border and every language was wonder. The decades that followed were turbulent and contradictory and very much alive. Vietnam, Watergate, the fall of the Berlin Wall. The digital revolution, as profound a rupture in human experience as the printing press had been 5 centuries earlier. September 11, 2001, when the sky over New York went quiet and then roared with horror, and everything changed again. The long wars that followed. The financial crisis of 2008. A black man named Barack Obama standing on the steps of the Capitol and taking the oath of office while the ghost of every enslaved American who had built that building seemed to breathe in the winter air. A global pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans. Political earthquakes. Social upheavals. A democracy stress-tested in ways its designers never anticipated. And still, the argument continues. That is the thing about America. It is an argument that never ends, and that is precisely the point. Other nations have been built on blood and soil and the certainty of ethnic identity. America was built on a proposition, a claim about human equality and self-governance that was, from the very beginning, more aspiration than reality. The distance between the America that was promised and the America that exists has always been the engine of its history. It is what drives the protest. And the election, the court case and the constitutional amendment, the march and the vote cast in a church basement at 6 in the morning. America is not a finished thing. It never has been. The founders knew it. Lincoln knew it. King knew it. Every generation of Americans has inherited both the promise and the debt, the extraordinary gift of a system designed, however imperfectly, to be improved, and the crushing obligation to actually improve it. The story is not complete. The experiment is not over. And in that unfinished quality, in the permanent, restless, sometimes agonizing work of a nation still trying to become what it claimed to be, there is something that looks, if you are willing to look hard enough, like hope. The land is still here. Ancient, breathing, patient, waiting to see what the people who live on it will do next. The story is not over. It never is. Not here.